My name is Leah, and this is how my aunt stole everything: my inheritance, my family's trust, and even my place in my grandfather's heart. But what she didn't know is that I never forget. And when you betray family, I don't get mad. I get methodical. This is the story of how I took it all back and destroyed her perfect little plan in the process. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, especially family, this story is for you. Hit that like button, subscribe for more real, raw revenge stories, and let me know in the comments, what's the most satisfying payback you've ever seen? Let's dive into bloodline betrayal. They say blood is thicker than water, but they never tell you what happens when that blood turns cold. In our family, loyalty used to mean something. Or maybe I just believed it did, because I wanted it to. I was raised by my grandfather after my mother died, suddenly, when I was 11. He was stern but kind, the kind of man who spoke softly but carried weight in every word. I loved him like a second father. I also knew I wasn't the daughter Claudia wanted him to have around. And for years, she made sure I never forgot it. Claudia was my mother's younger sister, loud, commanding, and obsessed with appearances. Where my mom was quiet and thoughtful, Claudia was a showboat in pearls and perfume, always performing for whoever happened to be watching. She married rich, divorced richer, and wore her bitterness like it was designer. From the moment I moved into grandfather's house, I could feel her resentment growing. She'd drop by unannounced, flash a plastic smile, and remind me I was lucky to be taken in. The subtle jabs, the backhanded compliments, the fake warmth, it was all part of the act. And grandfather never seemed to notice. I knew Claudia was waiting for him to get older, slower, more dependent. She hated that I became his confidant, the one he shared old photo albums with, the one he asked to handle his prescriptions and taxes. She would pretend to help, but I'd find her sneaking through his drawers when she thought I wasn't home. I began documenting everything just in case. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. Because I knew someday there would be a reckoning. What I didn't know was how quickly it would come, and how deep her betrayal would cut when it finally did. Grandfather had always been sharp, but over the last year, things changed. He forgot conversations, misplaced names. Once, he called me by my mother's name and didn't realize the mistake until I corrected him. Claudia swooped in like a hawk the moment she smelled weakness. She insisted on helping more: bank meetings, doctor's appointments, even setting up new advisors without consulting me. She smiled like she was saving the day, but I could feel the ground shifting. I asked him once if anything had changed in his will. He blinked slowly and said, "Everything's taken care of, sweetheart." That's when I knew. A week later, I came home from work to find the lawyer waiting in the living room. Not our family lawyer, Claudia's. He handed me an envelope and offered a forced apology. The new will had been signed 3 days ago. Claudia had full control of the estate, and I had been removed entirely. No trust. No inheritance. No explanation. My chest tightened, but I didn't let him see me break. I thanked him calmly and closed the door behind him. Then I sat down in the chair where my grandfather always read his paper and stared at the wall. The silence was unbearable. Claudia called that night, chirpy and smug. "I hope you're not too upset. Daddy just wanted to simplify things. He's old, Leah. He needs someone experienced to handle it all." Her voice dripped with mock concern. I stayed silent, letting her fill the space with condescending fluff. She was enjoying this. She thought she had won. And maybe she had for the moment. But what she didn't understand was this: you can't erase people like me. I remember everything. Every folder I organized, every password I reset, every document I scanned. And if she thought I'd let her get away with it, she didn't know me at all. I didn't cry that night. I didn't scream. I made tea and started writing. Names, dates, strange transactions I'd noticed in grandfather's accounts. Claudia's sudden appearances at medical appointments that I was excluded from. Copies of bank authorizations I'd filed, which had gone missing. I called my childhood friend Emily, now a lawyer, and told her everything. She didn't ask if I was sure. She knew me well enough to understand I wouldn't call unless something serious had gone down. We met the next morning. Over coffee and legal pads, we began putting the pieces together. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. Emily was calm, surgical in her analysis. Claudia had likely coerced the new will, maybe even forged elements. And if we could prove she manipulated a vulnerable elder, the consequences would be serious. But it wasn't just about the legal fight. It was personal. Claudia had spent her whole life clawing her way into control, and now she'd stolen my legacy, the one thing my grandfather and I had built together after losing my mother. This wasn't about money. It was about dignity, about what's right, and about showing Claudia that some people may stay quiet, but not forever. I visited grandfather the next day. He was in his study, staring out the window, distant. I sat beside him, quietly, holding his hand. He smiled weakly and said, "Your mother would have been proud of you." My throat tightened, but I held it in. I didn't bring up the will. Not yet. I didn't want to confuse him. But I knew he hadn't done this maliciously. Claudia had cornered him, played the loving daughter, whispered poison when no one was listening. And now she thought she held the crown. Let her believe it. Let her bask. The empire she'd stolen was made of glass. By the time I left his house that day, the plan had already begun to take shape. Emily would start the paperwork. I'd collect the evidence. Claudia wouldn't see it coming, not because I was hiding, but because she wasn't paying attention. That's the thing about people like her. They assume quiet means weak. They confuse kindness with passivity. But I was done playing along. She took my name off that will. She turned my grandfather against me. And now, she would learn something she never expected. When you come for the quiet one in the family, you'd better make sure she's not the one holding the receipts. 2 days after I learned about the will, Claudia invited me to brunch. The message was worded like she was doing me a favor. "Let's catch up, sweetheart. You've been so distant." She even added a smiley face, like this was all water under the bridge. I almost laughed. Brunch with Claudia was a performance, not a meal. I wore a calm expression and a navy dress she once said made me look invisible. She arrived 20 minutes late in a silk blazer, reeking of victory. I stood to greet her. She air-kissed my cheek like a queen blessing a peasant. "Darling, you look tired," she said, sipping her mimosa before I even sat down. "I hope you're not taking things too personally. You know how these things go." I smiled and stirred my coffee. Claudia spoke like betrayal was a scheduling conflict. I let her talk about her Pilates instructor, her new financial advisor, the burden of handling grandfather's affairs. She wore the role like a costume, the loving daughter stepping up for a man who raised her sister's orphan child. I listened carefully. Every lie was another thread unraveling. Every smug look etched deeper into the memory I planned to use later. She leaned forward halfway through the meal and dropped the bomb she came to deliver. "I know this has been difficult for you, Leah. But I promise, this was never about cutting you out. It's about streamlining, consolidating. You're still family." She said it like a concession, like I should thank her for acknowledging my existence. I nodded slowly and asked, "Did he sign it in front of you?" She blinked once, just slightly. "Of course," she replied. "We had it notarized. Everything's legal." That blink told me everything. Claudia was lying, and she didn't even realize she'd given me my first clue. After brunch, I called Emily. We started outlining a timeline. Claudia said the will was signed 3 days ago, but grandfather had been in and out of lucid memory that entire week. One afternoon, he thought it was 1987 and asked where my mother had gone. I documented it in my calendar. Emily reviewed state law on elder coercion. If we could prove Claudia manipulated a mentally compromised man into rewriting legal documents, we could have the will thrown out in probate. But it had to be airtight. Claudia had friends in places that mattered, and she wasn't stupid. Arrogant, yes, but not reckless. That same night, I went to grandfather's study. He was asleep in his armchair with a blanket across his lap, soft jazz playing from the old speakers. I sat at his desk, opened the drawer, and found a small folder labeled Legal. Inside were 3 versions of his will, 2 typed and signed, one scribbled in his own handwriting with "Do not trust Claudia" written in shaky letters on the bottom corner. My breath caught in my throat. I took photos of every page. The handwritten note wouldn't hold up in court alone, but it painted a story I could finish writing. Over the next week, Claudia became more present at grandfather's home, arranging appointments, canceling nurses, answering his phone. She moved like she owned the place, even started talking about renovations. I heard her on a call with a contractor, discussing converting the library into a media room. It made me sick. That library held our family history, photos, letters, memories no one else cared about. I started scanning everything. It wasn't just about legal proof anymore. It was about preserving what mattered before she painted it beige and filled it with imported wine racks and Pinterest furniture. She could steal the papers, but not the truth. Emily tracked down the notary who allegedly witnessed the new will. According to the logbook, he had no record of visiting the address that day. We requested security camera footage from the nearby intersection, showing Claudia's car wasn't even in the area during the signing. Slowly, our case was building. Claudia didn't just forge a legacy, she left fingerprints on every page. But while we worked quietly, she grew bolder. She started removing my photos from grandfather's home, saying things like, "Let's declutter," or "He needs a fresh start." I played along, packed them in a box, and made digital copies of everything. Then came the party. Claudia threw a celebration of legacy, an absurd, lavish gathering at grandfather's house, inviting old friends, colleagues, and distant relatives. I wasn't included in the planning. She sent me a formal invitation with my name misspelled. When I arrived, she greeted me like a hostess greeting a stranger. "Oh, I didn't expect you to show," she laughed. The crowd clapped as she made a speech about stepping into responsibility. Grandfather sat beside her, confused, clapping on cue. I stood near the back, watching. This wasn't just ego. Claudia wanted to erase my mother, erase me, but I was still here. She toasted the new chapter, and people cheered. Someone handed her a photo album labeled "Family Through the Years." It was filled with curated shots, mostly of her and grandfather. My mother appeared in only one. I wasn't in any of them. I stood frozen, clutching my glass, my jaw tightening. Claudia looked me dead in the eye as she turned each page. I smiled. Not because I was okay, but because I now understood her endgame. She didn't want to be part of the legacy. She wanted to become it. She was rewriting history one lie at a time. And history was about to fight back. When the guests left and the house quieted down, I stayed behind. Claudia gave me a tight smile. "Try not to be so dramatic, Leah. Sentiment doesn't pay the bills." I didn't respond. I picked up one of the discarded photo prints, stared at it, and said, "You've been planning this a long time." She chuckled. "Long enough to do it right." I nodded slowly, placing the photo back on the table. "I hope you did," I said, "because when it falls apart, and it will, I want you to remember this night. The dress, the speech, the fake album. Remember it all." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying Claudia's smug little toast and the fake photo album like a highlight reel of lies. But rage without direction is useless. So I got up, opened my laptop, and started writing. I created a spreadsheet, not of numbers, but of moments. Every strange bank withdrawal, every appointment Claudia attended alone, every time grandfather had a mental lapse. I color-coded it. Dates in red, lies in yellow, legal breaches in green. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was strategy. I wasn't planning revenge. I was preparing a restoration. Emily was impressed when I showed her the file. "This is borderline obsessive," she said, in the best possible way. We met twice a week in her apartment over takeout, combing through the evidence. She started drafting a case of undue influence, will manipulation, and elder coercion. We couldn't prove everything yet, but we had enough smoke to suggest fire. Still, Emily reminded me we needed a signature moment, something undeniable. So, I changed tactics. I stopped reacting. I stopped pushing back. I let Claudia believe she had won, that I had retreated. Because nothing feeds arrogance like the illusion of total control. I visited grandfather regularly, but I never discussed the will. I just talked, read to him, listened. I started recording our conversations on my phone, quietly, unobtrusively. Sometimes he was clear as day. Sometimes he wasn't sure what year it was. But one afternoon, I asked him who should take care of the house when he was gone. He answered without hesitation, "You, of course. Your mother would have wanted that." I almost cried. That sentence, spoken clearly, would become the centerpiece of our case. I had it saved in 5 different folders. Claudia was busy redecorating. I was busy documenting her downfall. To distract her, I played into her ego. I praised her party. I offered to help digitize old family records just to keep things organized. She agreed immediately, handing me access to files she didn't even understand. I found discrepancies in expense reports, charges labeled as estate maintenance that trace back to her personal credit card. She bought herself a $4,000 massage chair and labeled it wellness equipment for grandfather. I screenshotted everything. Meanwhile, Emily contacted a medical expert to assess the timeline of grandfather's cognitive decline. Her findings? He likely lacked full mental capacity at the time the new will was signed. Still, we needed the right moment to strike, one that couldn't be brushed off or buried. That's when I had the idea. Claudia loved being filmed. She couldn't resist a camera. So I offered to create a digital archive of grandfather's life, something for the family, a legacy project. I even suggested we include Claudia in interviews. She loved the idea. During her session, I asked a simple question. What motivated you to step into this role so suddenly? Her answer was pure gold. She smiled and said, "I always knew it would be me. I just had to make it official." The camera caught it all. Her tone, her eyes, the casual way she admitted her ambitions. Emily said it was still circumstantial, but powerful nonetheless, especially when paired with grandfather's conflicting statements. The more Claudia talked, the more rope she gave herself. I kept the interviews going for weeks, letting her dig deeper. Meanwhile, Emily filed an initial notice to contest the will. That froze all distributions until court review. Claudia panicked, started calling lawyers. But she underestimated me again. I'd already spoken to most of the reputable firms in town. The ones still available? They weren't in her league. I knew she'd try to outmaneuver me. That was fine. Let her spin. Let her panic. I had something stronger than noise. I had clarity. But the real turning point came when I spoke to the family accountant. He was old school, honest, and secretly horrified by Claudia's behavior. "Your mother was a good woman," he told me quietly. "And your grandfather adored you." He provided records that Claudia had hidden, ones showing grandfather's original instructions to leave me not just a share, but full control of the estate. "It was never meant to go to her," he said. That sentence lit a fire inside me. The next day, I went back to the study, opened a drawer Claudia never bothered with, and found the final piece, a notarized letter dated months before the new will, written by grandfather himself. It outlined his desire for me to preserve the family home, continue my mother's charitable work, and keep the heart of this family intact. Claudia had buried it under tax statements. I held it in my hands and felt the weight of validation. This wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. She stole the paper crown, but I held the soul of our family, and I was about to make that known. Emily and I scheduled a private family mediation, a last courtesy before the full legal battle. Claudia arrived in designer sunglasses, flanked by a lawyer I'd never seen before. Her confidence was cracking. Her tone was sharper, colder. She accused me of manipulation. "You're exploiting his decline," she hissed. I didn't flinch. "No, Claudia. I'm honoring it. You stole something sacred, and now you're going to answer for it." She laughed, but it was nervous. She wasn't used to resistance, especially not from me. That's when Emily opened the folder, placed the recordings, letters, statements, and receipts on the table, and said, "Let's begin." After the mediation, Claudia looked shaken, but not defeated. That told me one thing. She still believed she could wriggle free. People like her don't process consequence like the rest of us. They treat it like a passing inconvenience, not an ending. So I gave her what she needed most, space to gloat. I paused all communication for a week. No emails, no phone calls, no questions. In her mind, that was retreat. In mine, it was strategy. Because when someone is convinced you've given up, they stop hiding their tracks. And Claudia had left behind a trail of arrogance a mile long. I kept tabs through subtle channels. A cousin mentioned Claudia was celebrating a win over champagne. Another told me she was already contacting real estate agents about selling grandfather's home, even though it was still frozen under the estate dispute. That confirmed it. She thought we were bluffing. I knew I had to escalate the psychological game. So I made a calculated move. I called her. My tone was warm, even cheerful. I said I didn't want to drag this into court. I offered to meet, one-on-one. No lawyers. No documents. Just us. Her pause on the other end told me everything. We met at a wine bar she frequented, her turf. She wore her victory face again, lips painted too red, eyes watching me like a lion sizing up a wounded deer. I thanked her for meeting and ordered tea, which visibly annoyed her. "Still playing the wholesome one?" she asked, smirking. I didn't take the bait. Instead, I leaned in and said, "I've been thinking, maybe you were right. Maybe I don't have the stomach for a long fight." Her eyebrows lifted, just slightly. I could practically see her recalculating. I told her I might walk away for a price. She bit. The offer was bait. I said I'd sign a non-disclosure, walk away from the estate, and leave the family narrative to her if she paid me a fixed amount. It was high, just out of reach. Claudia blinked. She asked for time to think, trying to mask her glee. I knew she wouldn't agree. She'd use this to brag, to paint me as weak and desperate. I left that meeting smiling, knowing exactly what she would do next. The moment I left the bar, I texted Emily. "She's taking the bait. Watch her accounts." Because once Claudia believed the threat was gone, she'd get sloppy. And she did. 3 days later, Claudia wired a large transfer from the estate's frozen account to her personal investment firm, something legally forbidden while the probate dispute was ongoing. Emily got the alert through our monitoring setup. This wasn't just arrogance now, it was contempt for the law. We documented it. Then I went silent again. Another week passed. I returned to grandfather's house with flowers and books. He smiled, more lucid than usual, and said, "I don't trust her. I'm glad you're still here." I recorded it discreetly. I didn't need more evidence, but I wanted his voice in the story. Claudia sent me an email later that week. Short. Smug. Our last conversation was productive. "I'm glad you've come to your senses. I'll have a lawyer draft a mutual agreement soon." That was the moment I knew she was done. She had taken the bait, admitted it in writing, and broken a court order all in one neat week. The test had worked. She believed she'd won, and in doing so, exposed herself completely. I forwarded the email to Emily, who laughed when she read it. She just signed her own burial certificate, she said. And she was right. But we weren't done. The final piece of the trap was public. We submitted the evidence package to the court, along with a petition for emergency review of fiduciary misconduct. But instead of waiting for a quiet ruling, we sent a summary to the extended family first. A courtesy update, as Emily called it. It was polite, professional, and devastating. The response was immediate. Cousins who once kissed Claudia's ring began calling me. Uncles who avoided conflict now wanted answers. One relative, a former finance auditor, offered to testify if needed. The cracks in Claudia's empire spread fast. She had ruled through perception. Now she was naked to the room. She called me furious. "No more sugar, no more fake warmth. You ungrateful little parasite," she snarled. "This is family. You've turned everyone against me." I let her rant. When she finally asked, "What do you want from me?" I said, "Nothing. You already gave me everything I needed." And I hung up. That silence was one of the most satisfying sounds I've ever heard. I imagined her staring at the phone, realizing, for the first time, that she wasn't just losing money. She was losing the narrative. And worse, she was losing it to someone she never considered dangerous. The court date was set. In the meantime, Claudia was forced to account for every penny she'd touched since taking control. The forensic audit revealed vacations, spa visits, jewelry, all miscategorized as medical support or home upkeep. She tried to push blame onto her financial advisor, who promptly dropped her as a client. Her lawyer filed a request to delay the hearing. Denied. Emily and I kept moving. We filed to have Claudia removed as executor and requested full conservatorship over grandfather's affairs, citing neglect and financial abuse. It wasn't just about restoring the estate anymore. It was about protecting what remained of our family. The week before the hearing, I visited grandfather one last time before the storm. He was frail but clear-eyed. We sat in the garden, sunlight warming the bench. He reached for my hand. "You did good, Leah. Your mother would be proud." I looked at him, my heart heavy but strong. "I just want to protect what matters," I said. He nodded, a slight smile forming. "That's what your mother said, too." I recorded nothing. I took no notes. That moment didn't belong in a file. It was just ours. One final thread tying me back to the roots Claudia tried to cut. The morning of the hearing, I dressed with deliberate care. Not flashy, not mournful, just clean, sharp, and grounded, like the version of me Claudia never expected to see. Emily met me outside the courthouse with 2 slim folders and a coffee she'd labeled Victory Juice. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. Everything we needed was already in motion. Claudia arrived 15 minutes late, wearing a power suit 2 shades too bold for a court appearance. Her lawyer looked visibly irritated, probably realizing he'd hitched himself to a ship that was already leaking from every side. Let the games begin. Inside the courtroom, the air crackled. You could feel it, something heavy about to shift. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for theatrics, took her seat. Emily began with the facts: timeline, irregular will signing, notarization issues, questionable financial transactions, and audio-video evidence suggesting cognitive decline and coercion. She spoke like a scalpel, not a word wasted, every detail cutting clean. Claudia's lawyer objected here and there, but his energy faded fast. The judge was listening. She was writing. Claudia, seated across from me, looked like she'd aged 5 years overnight. Her makeup couldn't hide the panic simmering behind her eyes. Then came the centerpiece, the video. We played it on a court-approved monitor. Grandfather, lucid, describing in his own words how he trusted me with the family legacy. Then Claudia, smiling smugly during her filmed interview, saying, "I just had to make it official." The courtroom went silent. The contrast hit like a freight train. Claudia's face tightened as her own voice betrayed her, projected to a room full of people who could now see the mask slipping. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. Every second she spent squirming beneath her own words was worth more than gloating ever could be. Next came the financial records. The $4,000 massage chair. The spa days. The luxury getaway to a Napa vineyard booked the same week she told the family grandfather needed emergency medical treatments. The judge asked for receipts. Emily handed them over. Claudia's lawyer visibly winced. Then came the family accountant's testimony. Calm. Firm. "This was never what Mr. Foster intended," he said. "He told me explicitly that Leah was to manage the estate." I kept those notes because I feared this very situation. Notes. Dates. Signatures. Claudia shifted in her seat, her confidence cracking like ice under pressure. Her empire was crumbling in public view. For the first time, Claudia spoke. Her voice was brittle. She said I had manipulated the situation, that I was bitter, that grandfather had a history of confusion and playing favorites. She claimed I was trying to rewrite history. The judge interrupted. "You're listed here as executor, yes?" Claudia nodded. Then explain this transaction, the judge continued, pointing at a highlighted line in the audit. Claudia floundered, muttered about business expenses. The judge cut her off again. You categorized a Cartier watch as mobility support. Do you believe a watch improves an elderly man's ability to walk? Silence. Then I don't recall. It was over. The judge recessed to review everything privately. Emily leaned toward me and whispered, "She's done. The rest is formality." My heart pounded, not with fear, with release. For months I'd carried the weight of silence, doubt, legacy, and betrayal. Now, for the first time, I allowed myself to exhale. Claudia didn't speak, didn't look at me. Her mouth was a tight line, her hands clenched white around her handbag. Outside, reporters were gathering. The family group chat was already exploding. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about truth finally being seen, and the wrong person finally being held accountable. When the judge returned, her ruling was swift. Claudia was removed as executor, effective immediately. I was appointed interim estate conservator, pending full confirmation. The will was declared invalid, citing clear evidence of undue influence and cognitive incapacity. A formal investigation into financial abuse would follow. Claudia's lawyer tried to object, denied. The gavel came down. Bang. Done. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just stood and thanked the judge. As I left the courtroom, Claudia finally looked at me. Her eyes were hollow. No insults. No venom. Just the blank stare of someone who finally realized the game was up. Outside, the air felt different. Lighter. Emily smiled, but it wasn't smug, it was proud. "You did it," she said. "You pulled off what most people only dream of." Reporters tried to get a quote, but I declined. This wasn't for headlines. This was for my mother. For grandfather. For every quiet injustice that gets swept aside in polished kitchens and expensive wine bars. Claudia rushed past us, sunglasses on, head down. A former queen without a crown. I watched her walk away, her heels clicking against the stone steps like punctuation on a sentence she thought she was writing alone. Back home, I went to grandfather's room. He was sleeping, soft breath steady. I sat beside him and held his hand. I didn't wake him. I just stayed there, letting the silence settle. For the first time in months, it wasn't tense. It wasn't laced with dread. It was just peaceful. Later, I tucked the court ruling into his bedside drawer. Not for him to read, but for him to rest beside. The man who raised me deserved to know, in whatever part of his mind remained, that justice had found its way home, and that the truth had, finally, outlived the lies. That night, I walked through the house alone, room by room. The old piano where my mother taught me scales. The dusty hallway lined with crooked paintings. The sunroom where grandfather napped every afternoon. Claudia saw this place as a commodity, something to sell, flip, exploit. But to me, it was a living archive of love, laughter, and loss. I lit a candle and whispered, "We're taking it back." Not for revenge. For restoration. For every family torn apart by greed. For every quiet voice that refuses to disappear. The strike was done. The healing was next. And I was ready to begin. It didn't take long for Claudia to request a meeting. No lawyers. No mediators. Just her and me. She claimed she wanted closure. I agreed. Not because I believed her, but because I wanted her to see what defeat looked like when it stared her in the eye and refused to blink. We met at the same vineyard where she once toasted her new beginning. Poetic, really. She showed up late, hiding behind designer sunglasses and a neutral smile. I didn't bother pretending this was polite. I let the silence stretch. Let her feel the power shift. This wasn't her story anymore. She sat down, smoothed her blazer, and said, "You got what you wanted. Are you satisfied?" Her voice was calm, but her fingers tapped against the table, betraying the tension in her spine. I tilted my head. I didn't want money, Claudia. I wanted the truth to matter again. She scoffed, but it was weak. I leaned in. You tried to rewrite a family's history and steal a man's legacy while he was still breathing. You lied. You manipulated. And for what? A property you don't even love. Her jaw tightened. The facade was cracking, and this time, she didn't have a script. You think you're better than me, she said coldly. Because you play the good granddaughter. Because you keep your skeletons in a prettier box. I smiled without warmth. No, Claudia. I know exactly who I am. That's what scares you. I stood and walked to the railing, looking out over the vineyard rows she once paraded through like royalty. You've built your entire life around illusion. But when you're finally stripped of titles, of influence, who are you? She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because without power, Claudia was just a woman who'd burned her bridges and salted the earth behind her. She tried to change the subject. The house is too much for one person. You'll drown in it. I turned back, arms folded. Then I'll drown where I belong. At least I won't be trespassing on someone else's dream. Her mouth twisted. Your mother never saw me as family. Don't act like she was perfect. My voice dropped. No, she wasn't. But she loved fiercely, and she protected what mattered. Which is why she never trusted you near the reins. That landed. Claudia flinched, then masked it with a sip of wine. But I saw it. That sliver of truth piercing her ego. Do you think you won? She asked, quieter now. You've turned the family against me. Congratulations. I shook my head. You did that on your own. I just stopped cleaning up the mess. That hit harder. She stared at her glass, but didn't drink. I walked back to the table, slow and steady. This wasn't revenge, Claudia. This was reclamation. You broke something sacred. I rebuilt it without you. I slid a small envelope across the table. Grandfather asked me to give you this. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a photo, her and grandfather, smiling, long before the war began. He remembered. I said gently. He wasn't always gone. For a moment, the mask slipped entirely. She blinked rapidly, lips trembling. He gave this to you? I nodded. Told me to return it when I thought you were ready to see it for what it was. A moment. Not leverage. Not proof. Just a moment. Claudia looked at the photo like it was a relic of a life she barely recognized. And maybe it was. A flicker of humanity passed across her face. Guilt? Regret? I don't know. It didn't matter. The damage had been done, but I had no more to take. I never meant to hurt him, she whispered. But it was always like he looked through me. For a heartbeat, she wasn't a villain. She was just a niece who grew up in the shadow of love that never quite reached her. I could have pitied her. Maybe some part of me did. But that didn't excuse the betrayal. The manipulation. The lies. You chose to burn bridges instead of build them, I said. Now you're alone by your own design. She didn't deny it. And maybe that was the closest she'd ever come to admitting the truth. As I stood to leave, she said, So what happens now? I paused. You live with it. Just like I lived with it when you stole everything. Except now, you'll do it without applause. Her face hardened again, but the silence between us said more than her eyes ever could. She watched me walk away, not with anger, but with something that looked a lot like understanding. I didn't look back. Not once. I stepped into the sunlight, out of the shadow of her games, and onto the path I had reclaimed with grit and fire. My story was mine again. Driving home, I played grandfather's old recordings through my car speakers. His voice, warm and confident, filled the air like a soft blanket around my heart. Family is the soil you grow from, he'd once said. But you still choose your roots. I smiled. I had chosen mine, through pain, through battle, through truth. Claudia could keep her bitterness. I had the house. I had the legacy. I had peace. And more than anything, I had become the woman my mother always hoped I'd be, strong enough to fight, wise enough to heal, and brave enough to let go without forgetting. 3 months passed. The court formally named me executor of the estate. Claudia didn't contest it. She couldn't afford to. By then, the family knew everything. Some forgave her quietly. Others didn't. But I didn't care either way. Her reign was over. And mine wasn't a throne. It was stewardship. I moved into the house shortly after the ruling. Not to claim territory, but to preserve it. The first time I stepped inside alone, I paused in the foyer and whispered, "I'm home." Not just physically. I was finally standing in the place my mother built, my grandfather protected, and I had reclaimed. The house creaked differently at night, as if it were adjusting to the absence of Claudia's tense presence and the return of someone who truly cared. I spent hours cleaning rooms, restoring old photos, and cataloging grandfather's letters. I turned the study into a quiet library, just like he always wanted. I even replanted the rose bushes my mother once adored. Neighbors dropped by with baked goods and cautious smiles. They'd heard whispers, but didn't ask questions. Some brought stories about my grandfather. Others just said, "We're glad it's you." And I believed them, because for the first time, I felt fully seen. Grandfather passed peacefully 2 weeks later. I was holding his hand. There were no final speeches, no dramatic gasps, just a soft exhale and the weight of generations settling into the soil. We buried him beside my mother. I gave the eulogy, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to tell the truth aloud. I spoke of legacy, love, and how silence had once nearly destroyed our family. Afterward, Claudia stood at the edge of the crowd. She wore black, alone, and left without saying a word. I didn't stop her. Some apologies live in absence. Some chapters are closed without punctuation. The reading of grandfather's final wishes was simple. Nothing dramatic. No hidden clauses. He'd reinstated my name quietly months before, once he knew I was fighting not for money, but meaning. He left Claudia a modest trust and a letter. I never read it, but I hope it said something honest. My inheritance wasn't the house or the assets. It was the truth, the fire, and the ability to stand my ground without becoming the monster I was facing. Emily called me afterward, joking. "So what's next, Lady of the Manor?" I laughed. "Rest. Then maybe something more." Because I wasn't done. A month later, I launched a scholarship in my mother's name for young women in law, advocacy, and social justice. We funded it using the remainder of Claudia's unused travel funds. I considered it poetic accounting. The launch was quiet but meaningful. One of the first recipients wrote me a letter, thanking me for fighting so that women like me don't have to start at zero. I cried reading it. Ugly, full-body sobs. Not because I was sad, but because I knew, deep down, that something good had finally come from all the wreckage. That felt like peace. And peace is rare in stories like mine. Sometimes I drive past Claudia's apartment downtown. It's smaller now, humbler. I don't feel spite. Just a strange, bittersweet detachment. She's living with the consequences of her own ambition. She's no villain in a tower anymore, just a woman who overplayed her hand. The last time our paths crossed was at a charity gala. She looked older, quieter. She nodded. I nodded back. No words. No smile. Just a fragile truce between two people who had once shared blood, silence, and a battlefield. Some things don't need resolution. They just need distance. And in that quiet, we finally found a kind of ending. I still hear grandfather sometimes. In the creak of his study chair. In the soft hum of old jazz on the record player. I kept his books exactly as they were. I even talk to him sometimes. Tell him how the roses are blooming. How Emily finally convinced me to co-author a book about legacy and ethics. How I'm trying, really trying, to become a woman of principle, not just pride. He'd smile at that. Maybe chuckle and say, "Your mother would be proud." I hope she would. I hope wherever she is, she sees the fight, the fire, and the faith I finally found. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But I disagree. True justice? It's warm, restorative. It doesn't taste like bitterness. It tastes like balance. Like laughter over coffee in the sunroom. Like a child walking through the halls of her family's home and knowing she belongs. I didn't destroy Claudia. I didn't need to. I just dismantled the lie she built and replaced it with truth. That's the real power, not in ruin, but in rebuilding. Not in winning, but in restoring what should have never been lost. And that, in the end, is the sweetest taste of all. If you're wondering whether I'd do it all again, the pain, the planning, the long nights of doubt, the answer is yes. Because some fights are worth it. Some stories deserve to be told correctly. And some family names are worth reclaiming. Not for vanity, not for status, but because love, real love, deserves defenders. And because sometimes justice doesn't wear robes or hold gavels. Sometimes justice walks back into the house her mother was born in, wipes the dust from the windows, and begins again. This time on her own terms. My name is Leah Foster, and I took it all back.